Be featured on ILTV and show the world what you have to offer. We broadcast from Israel to around the globe, so get yourself camera ready.
Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, Israel takes a new approach of soft suppression against the coronavirus. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Naftali Bennett spends a half hour blasting the Knesset opposition as a bunch of sourpusses. And finally, in a historic first-of-its-kind address, Yamina MK Shirley Pinto hitting the Knesset with hard truths during an all-sign language speech. To begin, Israel's daily COVID cases now reaching the highest number of infections since March. The coronavirus cabinet then discussing a new strategy tonight in attempts at curbing the seemingly ever-worsening pandemic. Hannah Rifkin with the details.
The Israeli Health Ministry reporting some 700 new coronavirus cases overnight for a positivity rate of over 1%, the highest figures seen since March 25th. And of the new patients, at least 46 in serious condition and some 65 returning from abroad. Israel's coronavirus cabinet then convening this evening to organize an intensive new strategy similar to that of the UK. That is, learning to live with the virus while preventing an economically disastrous fourth wave lockdown. This especially since just over a month ago, Israelis were enjoying feelings of freedom from coronavirus's consequences. In any case, Alpha, Beta, Delta, and now Lambda, new virus variants popping up faster than we can name them. Prime Minister Naftali Bennett then introducing what he's calling a, quote, soft suppression policy, including intensifying the monitoring of infections, vaccination drives, rapid testing, and information campaigns regarding face masks. Additionally, as part of the new strategy, Health Minister Nitzan Horowitz now recommending booster shots to those with impaired immune systems, with advisory panels even pondering vaccinating children under 12, provided they suffer from existing medical conditions.
Moving on, the Knesset exploding overnight with arguably the biggest showdown yet between Prime Minister Naftali Bennett and former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Bennett, for one, trolling both the opposition as well as his predecessor-turned-opposition leader with a play on Netanyahu's own words from a few years back. Chamutzim, meaning sourpusses or pickles.
חבר הכנסת נתניהו, חברת הכנסת דיסטל וסמוטריץ', הפכתם לחמוצים החדשים. הפכתם לחמוצים החדשים. כי את מה שאתם הזנחתם, אנחנו מתקנים, ואתם החמוצים החדשים. רק מקטרים ומייללים ומתבכיינים. נכנסתם כל כך מהר לתפקיד החמוצים, שגם כשאתם רואים דברים נפלאים קורים, אתם לא יכולים לפרגן. אני אתן לכם דוגמאות. בואו ניתן דוגמאות. חבר הכנסת נתניהו פחד שבוע אחרי שבוע לקיים מצעד גלים, והוא דחה ודחה ופחד, ואז קיימנו, קיוויתי לראות מחיאות כפיים. כלום, רק קיטרתם, כי אתם החמוצים החדשים.
Bennett then going on to list a number of other examples of the opposition's apparent indignation, including over issues with coronavirus, Iran, Jordan, national security, and more. Bennett even mocked Netanyahu with an impersonation in which he admitted as Netanyahu to stealing other people's credit. Netanyahu and other right-wing opposition leaders, for their part, however, responding harshly to Bennett's address. Netanyahu blaming the new so-called fraudulent government under Bennett and Yair Lapid of spoiling coronavirus successes, capitulating to American demands, and abandoning the fight against the nuclear deal with Iran. So who's right? Joining me to discuss is Michael Kleiner, former Likud MK and president of the Likud Supreme Court, and Jeremy Salton, political strategist and director of English operations for the Yamina Party. Thank you both so much for being with us. Now, Michael, I'll start with you. What are your reactions to Bennett's speech?
Look, this is Parliament. We are a democracy. Mr. Bennett has to get used to be Prime Minister and to be a little bit more Prime Minister-like in his approach and the way he speaks with the Knesset. On the other hand, he has also to realize that the task of opposition is to oppose. And there is one fact that Mr. Bennett cannot deny. You spoke about the corona before. When Netanyahu left office a month ago, there were less than 10 people, new people ill in corona a month ago, and now there are 700. So I don't put all the blame on Bennett, of course, but I guess it should be handled much earlier, much in a more swiftly way. But Mr. Bennett was busy celebrating becoming Prime Minister, probably.
Okay. I'd like to hear your response, Jeremy.
Sure. You know, what we saw was the Prime Minister responding to a request by 40 MKs who signed their signatures from the opposition, who were looking to attack the Prime Minister on a number of issues, including some of the things that Michael just mentioned. What we saw was the Prime Minister going ahead and defending his record and listing the many accomplishments we've had over the last month. Now, I understand that the opposition is trying to go ahead and do everything possible in order to go ahead and bring us down, of course, led by MK Netanyahu. But what it comes down to is the fact that even when we have had right-wing accomplishments, such as for the first time with the Eviatar arrangement, leaving the buildings there instead of knocking them down, as happened during the Netanyahu administration, us going ahead and moving forward with the decision to have the Flag March parade. Of course, our decision to actually finally implement the law that goes ahead and takes away money that goes to terrorists in prison through the PA. I can keep going in terms of the 35 approvals that were done in terms of various areas within Judea and Samaria, things that were held up by Netanyahu as well. It's amazing how all of these things have suddenly escaped him.
Well, so I want to follow up. Why do you think, because you mentioned that Bennett felt the need to defend himself, but you know, I watched that speech and he went a little bit beyond just defending himself. He went on the attack. He named Knesset members. He smiled when they were being kicked out, and et cetera. He attacked several different politicians for being complainers, whiny sourpusses or pickles, as I enjoyed to translate that. So
Yes.
why did he feel? I mean, didn't it seem a little bit petty? A little bit, Jeremy?
I don't think it was petty at all. People who remember, we didn't have it during the last opposition that we were part of, but people who remember 10 years ago when we would have these monthly exercises of the 40 MK signature speeches, Netanyahu had the same tone. Perhaps people just have short memories. But what you have is a situation where you have a well-oiled machine being led by the Likud and MK Netanyahu that are going out every single day and spreading lies. Here we had an opportunity, thanks to the opposition, requiring the Prime Minister's presence and, of course, giving him a chance to give a rebuttal to the ridiculous speeches that were given beforehand. And you mentioned some of them, MKs, that, of course, the Prime Minister mentioned within his speech, who are some of the biggest stars in terms of going to the media and distorting the actual truth of what is happening in terms of course, Israel's national security concerns, our diplomatic relations, stuff that have to do with the coronavirus, and of course, many other, as I said, accomplishments that we've been able to bring to our right-wing constituency. So I do not find it petty at all. I think a lot of people that I spoke to after the speech, in fact, even some journalists sent me some messages that they were surprised to see Netanyahu going ahead and trying to continue with Bennett this situation, because of course after Bennett finished his speech, Netanyahu went up again, and then Bennett went up again, and you sort of have a situation that more resembles the UK Parliament of Prime Minister Question Hour, of this sort of back and forth with opposition, and I think this is a normal thing in a majority of parliaments around the globe.
All right. I know that we have a lot more to discuss here, but in the meantime, Jeremy Salton, Michael Kleiner, thank you so much for joining us with your insights. And if you'd like to see more of my interview with Michael Kleiner and Jeremy Salton, please go online to ILTV.tv or ILTV's YouTube or Facebook pages. Now, in other news, while Israel's Knesset members were busy attacking one another, Israel's new president, Isaac Herzog, was speaking with Turkish President Erdogan in a landmark phone call. The pair spent roughly 40 minutes on the line and eventually agreed that for the benefit of regional security and stability, Israel and Turkey must return to their formerly good relations. Ties between the two states took a major hit back in 2010 following two major public incidents. The first, an embarrassing row between then Deputy Foreign Minister Dani Ayalon and Turkish Ambassador Ahmet Oguz Selikol, who was later recalled and not replaced for years. Then the second incident in 2010 alone being the Turkish flotilla event, or the killing of 10 Turkish activists aboard the Mavi Marmara, which attempted to violently breach the naval blockade around Gaza. In any case, with a new Israeli president and government in charge, this latest phone call could be the start to a whole new relationship, with Erdogan and Herzog both noting issues relating to the pandemic, trade relations, the Palestinians, and more. Speaking of international ties, Israel's Foreign Minister Yair Lapid continuing his meetings with world leaders in Brussels, Belgium. And while addressing the EU Foreign Affairs Council for the first time in over a decade, Lapid officially declaring his support for a two-state solution. But Lapid is also claiming that a peace agreement will only work on the condition that a future Palestinian state be both democratic and peaceful with Israel. So, what does this mean? Here to analyze is expert on the Middle East and U.S.-Israel ties, retired Israeli Ambassador Yoram Ettinger. Ambassador Ettinger, thank you so much for being with us. Is this a departure from Israel's previous policy?
Well, it's not a departure from Israeli policy, but it's a repeat of self-destruct policies. We first encountered it in 1993, and the same erroneous assumptions which have nothing to do with the Middle East were made, which led to the Oslo Accord, assuming that dramatic historical gesture to the Palestinians, at that time Arafat and Mahmoud Abbas, would moderate the Palestinians. The reaction by the Palestinians, as by the way should have been expected, was more intense terrorism against Israel. And it seems to me that the most effective and objective way to assess the merit of Israel Foreign Minister's recent statement about the advisability of a Palestinian state is to examine such a statement against the backdrop of the Palestinians of the PLO. There is a reality in the Middle East where Arabs do not flex muscles other than their talk on behalf of the PLO. And the reason they don't flex their military or financial or political muscle on behalf of the Hamas Palestinians, PLO Palestinians, or any Palestinians is the fact that as far as Arabs are concerned, the Palestinians have been role model of intra-Arab terrorism, intra-Arab subversion, and intra-Arab ingratitude. And moreover, you can assess the impact of a proposed Palestinian state on the state of the Middle East, as well as American interest, by describing or by identifying the allies of the Palestinians in the past and in the present. We're talking about Iran, North Korea, we're talking about Cuba, Venezuela. In the past, we're talking about the Soviet bloc, before the Soviet bloc, Nazi Germany. A Palestinian state in the West Bank would doom the pro-Western, pro-Hashemite, pro-US Hashemite regime in Jordan, would create a negative ripple effect from Jordan southward into the Arabian Peninsula, dealing a major blow to every single pro-American Arab regime, destabilizing the Middle East, and certainly a Palestinian state would be a very accommodating foothold for the Ayatollahs of Iran, for Russia, for China, certainly not for any Western or US military force in the Middle East.
So it sounds like, effectively speaking, it doesn't actually change that much on the ground, as long as the other Arab states in the region have their own opinions on the matter. In the meantime, I think we'll have to wait and see exactly how this plays out. Ambassador Eggenger, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Now, a seriously bittersweet moment in the Knesset on Monday. Deaf Knesset member from the Yamina party, Shirley Pinto, delivering a historic and powerful speech. But in it, Pinto outlining the long road ahead towards creating an actually fully accessible society in Israel. For the first time in Israeli history, the country's first ever deaf Knesset member, Shirley Pinto, delivering her opening speech to the plenum through Hebrew Sign Language and her interpreter, Liat Pecho. Pinto is the first ever deaf MK, having been bumped up into parliament thanks to the so-called Norwegian law, which allows acting government ministers to give up their Knesset seats for the next party member on their lists. Pinto, however, is by no means a supposed sympathy hire, the 32-year-old very much earning her way through her long career of activism on behalf of Israelis with disabilities. And she says that despite her pride in Israel and her deep love for the nation and its people, unfortunately, we still have a ways to go.
מגיל קטן, יחד עם הוריי, חוויתי ממקור ראשון, על בשרי ועל נפשי, את החוסר הנגישות, היעדר המודעות והחסמים הטבועים בחברה. הקשיים מתבטאים בדברים הבסיסיים ביותר בחיי היום-יום. בין אם מדובר באזרח עם מוגבלות שאינו מצליח להתפרנס בכבוד, כי האוטובוס הבין-עירוני המגיע למקום עבודתו אינו נגיש. או אזרח חירש שהורדם לקראת הליך רפואי פולשני ללא הסכמתו, כי לא הבין את הרופא והצוות הרפואי לא הבין אותו, כי אין בו נמצא תרגום לשפת סימנים. אם זה תלמיד כיתה א' שמתמודד עם אפילפסיה ולא מגיע ללימודים כבר שנה שלמה, משום שבית הספר אינו מאפשר לו להיכנס לכיתה יחד עם כלב השירות שלו, והרשימה עוד ארוכה.
Pinto then going on to say that since the founding of the state, Israel has failed to provide proper responses for the disabled community and has instead only succeeded in pushing them to the margins. That said, we're not without hope. Pinto calling on her fellow Knesset members to join her in the fight as soon as possible, starting with the simple awareness that there is a problem to address, and ending with a total rethinking of how things are done.
אנחנו צריכים לפעול להנגיש את היום-יום עכשיו. כל מבנה שנבנה חייב להיות נגיש מראש לאנשים וילדים עם מוגבלות פיזית. כל שירות שניתן חייב להיות נגיש מראש למוגבלות חושית או שכלית. כל מוצר שמיוצר חייב להיות נגיש מראש לכל סוגי המוגבלויות. מוסדות ציבוריים חייבים להוות ראש חץ בנושא ובעקבותיו יבואו השאר.
Finally, thanking Prime Minister Bennett, Interior Minister Ayelet Shaked, and several others for their ongoing support, Pinto signed off. But receiving her historic message with a rare showing of support, Pinto received an emotional standing ovation and the warm embrace of almost all her colleagues.
ובשם מיליוני אזרחי ואזרחיות ישראל עם מוגבלות, ובשם אזרחי ישראל כולה, מתחייבת אני.
Now, a new plan laid out detailing a solution to the massively increased rush hour congestion over the past year. A toll that could cost drivers up to 37.5 shekels per day, provided they're driving through the center of the state. And further plans are to be revealed in time. So joining us with more insights into this situation is economic consumer behavior expert, Assistant Professor Vili Abraham. Vili, thanks so much for being with us. Now, the tolls apparently apply in varying degrees to drivers in 3 different areas, central Tel Aviv, and the inner zone and the outer zone. And of course, this is also during certain times of day. But what exactly does this mean, and where are these zones?
All right, so we're talking about fees that will be collected via electronic means, cameras. And We're actually talking about 3 zones: Central Tel Aviv, which is Tel Aviv itself. Then there's the inner area, which it hasn't been reported what exactly they mean, but I'm assuming that they're talking about the immediate cities around Tel Aviv, like Hulon and Ramat Gan. And when we're talking about the outer cities, we're talking about Herzliya and, for example, Petach Tikva. I assume that's what they're talking about. Now, the fees will vary depending on the hours of the day. So if you're traveling within Tel Aviv between 6:30 in the morning and 10 o'clock in the morning, the rush hour, you'll pay 5 shekels. If you're traveling within Tel Aviv between 3 o'clock in the afternoon and 7 p.m., you'll pay 2.5 shekels. If you're traveling in the inner ring, Bat Yam, Hulon, Ramat Gan, you'll be paying 2.5 shekels if you're driving in these areas between 3 and 7 o'clock. The outer rings, Petach Tikva, Herzliya, and other cities, you'll pay 5 shekels between 6:30 in the morning and 10 o'clock in the morning, and 2.5 shekels between 3 and 7 p.m.
So what about residents who are living in the city, for example, who during rush hour traffic are actually in the opposite direction? They're leaving the city, but they're still technically driving in the city. What about commercial vehicles that make a living driving in and out of these high congestion areas? How is this going to affect them?
Yeah, well, that's a serious question. We know that buses and taxis and emergency vehicles will be exempted from this fee. It's a really good question. What happens to truck drivers and people who are making a living out of driving? If we look at Tel Aviv residents, I'm assuming that even if you're a Tel Aviv resident, you will be paying the fee because most of the traffic caused in the morning is by Tel Aviv residents. So assuming that they'll be paying the fee regardless of where they're traveling. If you look at a OECD report that was published in 2020, Israel lags behind significantly in comparison to other OECD countries, both as far as infrastructure development is concerned and both as far as investment in infrastructure. And the report suggests that Israel does develop infrastructure, does start to levy this congestion fee, and also divide Israel into metropolitan areas. There's this model called the Metropolitan Authority model, and it means that there will be an agreement between different cities, say in the south of the country, just like there is here in the center of the country, and this will enable people from the periphery to find jobs and to commute to places of work outside their community.
Well, I know I drive in and out of the city all the time, so I guess on a personal note, I'm not loving the toll, but we'll see how it all plays out. Vili, thank you so much for being with us.
It was a pleasure.
Now, our final story this evening, a Bar Ilan University archaeological survey has just found a small but incredible discovery. 2 coins that date back some 2,000 years discovered in the Binyamin region of the West Bank, and they show evidence of early Jewish life here in Israel. The coins reportedly originating from the period of the Jewish rebellion against the Romans, with one dating back to the time of the Second Temple and featuring the Hebrew inscription "Freedom for Zion" on one side. Meanwhile, the other coin, dating back to the Bar Kokhba revolt, circa 132 to 136 in the Common Era, and it's likewise featuring a palm branch surrounded by a wreath right beside an inscription reading "Freedom to Jerusalem" on one side. Most importantly, though, these finds are defying previously held beliefs that the Jewish settlements north of Jerusalem were all destroyed during the Great Rebellion, with Dr. Dvir Raviv, the leader of Bar Ilan survey, saying that the coins indicate the presence of Jewish populations in the area at least until the end of the Bar Kokhba revolt. Now let's take a look at the weather forecast with Hannah Rifkin.
Tonight's lows mostly in the 20s, and then tomorrow temperatures expecting to reach highs mostly in the mid-30s. Meteorologists saying some clouds to appear in the central and southern regions. And now back to the studio with Aaron.
All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.28 shekels to the American dollar and 2.62 shekels to the Canadian dollar. And finally, for the latest updates and news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well as to our newsletter at iltv.tv. I'm Aaron Porras. Be well. Thank you so much for watching.